Hey guys, Professor Bill, Comic Book University, and Devil's Reign, issue number 1 of 6. Look, I can come up with a couple little problems I have with this comic book, but by the end of the day, I mean, holy crap, this is a rock solid comic book. This is a comic book where every single time something happened, I said, well, then such and such has to happen, or something to the effect of such and such has to happen. I turn the page, bang, it happens. This is a book that it kept on delivering on pretty much every single thing that it was meant to deliver. I'm going to complain about a couple of things, but most of this is going to be pure praise. This was a rock solid comic book. I cannot recommend this issue enough. I'm hoping that the other 5 issues and the stack-ons are going to, because they're barely add-ons at this point, the stack-ons are going to be minimally worth it. Because, wow. Also, this is going to be important to have been reading Daredevil. I'm going to get into that also. Devil's Reign Part 1. The writer is Chip Zdarsky. The artist is Mark Czecho, and the color artist is Marcio Mendez. Letters by VC's Clayton Cowles. Cover artists, Czecho and Matthew Wilson. So, not too shabby, man. I really like this. Couple of variant covers out there. Not too many for Marvel, at least. Too many for my taste, but not too many for Marvel. And the logo design is Jay Bowen with Chip Zdarsky. I'm saying dude, Chip is one of those guys who you get so much with. You know what I'm saying? Like him and Zub. These guys, both Jim Zub, for those who, have noticed that Jim Zub hasn't been writing a whole lot of comic books as of late. He's too busy owning the Dungeons and Dragons world, so it is what it is. But these are two guys who have a solid understanding of art while being writers. You know what I'm saying? So they're able to cross into multiple worlds and just kind of, you know what I'm saying, knock all these things out. I absolutely love that. Jay Bowen has done multiple logo designs. And Chip jumping in here, this was a hell of a lot more than just a random suggestion. You know what I'm saying? Like this was him actually chipping in. Oh, God, so perfect. So I saw that this was actually coming out only because I happened to have caught his newsletter where he, boasts that it's raining men, but like Devil's Reign, that spelling, Reign. I'm just like, Chip, I don't know if this guy's actually got a family, but I know for a fact his dad jokes are on fleek. Do kids still say on fleek? I don't know. And I don't care. The point is, Daredevil is, and mind you, this is Daredevil, okay? Devil's Reign, I know. Some people can say, well, of course, don't assume. Don't do that, okay? My first complaint is that this book should have not been an individual book. All right, this should have been a Daredevil series. This should have been part of the Daredevil series. You want to do the add-on and whatever, fine. Do what you got to do. Like, Daredevil, Devil's Reign. This should have been part of a story arc that just had a bunch of other people in it. But there's another one of those quote-unquote mini events that Marvel boasts. For the past couple of years, they've been boasting, yeah, we're going to do, fewer big events, but we're going to do a whole lot more mini events. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for more stuff that's just very confusing and easy to get out of order. Hey, this is great if you're a current comic book reader, but your kids will look back on this and go, where does this belong? I don't understand how this is supposed to be categorized. Like, so what do I have to read in order to understand this stuff? Because second complaint, I know, Bill, you said this was a great book. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of the complaints out of the way. I like to give the bad news first. All right. That's just, I don't want to soften up a blow. All right. There were only 2 or 3 footnotes, editor's notes, indicating other comic books. And they were literally in the last couple of pages of this comic book. Big mistake on their part. And this is an editor's issue, but the editor needs to deal with these freaking issues. All right. I've said this way too many times. It's painful to me that Marvel as a company doesn't push for editors to do editor's notes, that they say it's optional. And I've got this firsthand from people who work for Marvel, writers and you name it, that it's optional. In fact, one particular editor, no, 2 editors. Anyway, whatever. Look, trust me, okay? I've talked to people. It is optional for them to put this stuff in. No. Editors should mandatory have to put in at least 1 per arc, if nothing else. Like, find something that's going to get people to potentially jump on another comic book because it references something else or somebody else's run or something. I understand if a writer doesn't want to do that, but an editor damn well should. They absolutely should be able to say, okay, let's try and get them on a different comic book also. Let's try and get them to go and pick up a trade paperback, right? Let's try and get the reader to jump on something else also, even if it's just one lousy issue. Let's try to do that, because that's an internal way of being able to build sales of an audience that's already a proven audience. People are already buying your book. You add in something else, and guess what? Even if you get 10% of those people, they're still going to go and they're going to buy your comic books. They're going to go and buy whatever you recommend to them, as long as it doesn't get too much. This is, to me, to a guy with a bachelor's in marketing, this is obvious. This is painfully obvious. You do this or you're fired. How about that? That's me as a bully manager. You know what I'm saying? That's me taking the bully pulpit at the very least. You do this or you're fired, because you don't really have too many other jobs to do. And I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear the complaints. Freaking advertise other books. Recommend other books. This is no different than walking into a bookstore. There are still bookstores in existence. There really are. And then seeing, oh, hey, has this person helped you out a lot? This person in the store, have they helped you out a lot? Well, they recommend this book. Oh, what, really? John recommends this book? Cynthia recommends this book? Yes, they do. You might like it. That you read a bunch of other things they recommended. Here's something else, even when they're not here. It's not that hard to me. And putting this stuff at the end, look, there was a lot of stuff that happened in here. Because mind you, I had no idea what this was until, I think, afternoon yesterday, right? Yesterday afternoon is about the time that I saw the newsletter dropped, and I looked at it. And that's yesterday your time. It's today for me. I looked at this like, oh, he's got Devil's Reign coming out. And I'm not going to sit there and just, read every single thing in there, because Chip's one of those funny guys. I like to look at his headlines and little things like that. Reading his actual stuff, a lot of it's Chip's humor. Chip is a funny guy in person. His writing, it doesn't always come off the same way. Even though I've got his voice and his facial expressions in my mind, because I've talked to him a couple of times, face to face, more than a couple times, but you get my drift. I can put his inflection and his tone and his facial expressions and his mannerisms into what I'm reading, but it's still not the same as actually listening to him. Him himself, I could listen to him talk all day long, but his jokes in writing, they don't always come off quite the same way. It is what it is. He's got a very unique way of telling jokes. They're not all dad jokes. They're like advanced dad jokes. But at the end of the day, this is basically, and this is another editor's decision, I guarantee you, Chip did not want this or did not ask for this. This should have just been a part of the Daredevil series, because doing this separately, this was so painful. You needed far more editor's notes in here, because it is not a part of that. You need to say, hey, the most recent episode of Daredevil that dropped was this issue. This way you could say, oh, by the way, Charlie Cox is definitely coming to the MCU. You're saying, I'm sure you didn't hear this first. It was all over Twitter yesterday, 2 days ago for you. But the point is, and Kevin Feige confirmed it anyway, but the point is, if there are going to be naysayers, and I know this because having a comic book channel, you'd be surprised how many people contact me, whether it's in the comment section or email or whatever, Twitter, whatever, and they contact me and they've got something negative to say. When I say something like this, hey, I have no idea that this is actually in the Daredevil world. What's his name? Mary is there, and I know that it's Typhoid Mary, but what if I didn't know it's Typhoid Mary? They didn't explain that it was Typhoid Mary. Hey, he's got a son. Kingpin, he's got a son. That was pointed out in here. Hey, say, I've got the first issue where he appeared in this very stack right here that you see. I've got it somewhere in that big mess. I've got that. So I knew that. But looking at this, even though they said, oh, here's a son, how about, the first appearance of his son, or read all about it in Daredevil issue number, whatever the frick it was, in there someplace, Oh, there's also what was the other thing that was in here? Elektra is in the Daredevil universe. What if somebody's not reading Daredevil right now, but they look at Devil's Reign like, oh, some kind of an event thing. Maybe it's like Civil War. Let's check it out. Well, it is a lot like Civil War, but that's the way the comic books are done nowadays. Take a really cool idea that was done before and just rehash it. Mind you, Civil War even took the idea from the X-Men. There was a part in there where Wolverine actually said to some of the other, heroes that were there, yeah, how's it feel? Sentinels watching over you. Not a good feeling, is it? Your mama, right? I may have added that last part, but you get what I'm saying. The X-Men have been dealing with that forever. That's Claremont and Shooter, So even Civil War was just a copy off of something else, but even other copies of those copies of the copy was actually made reference to in here, like the outlawed thing with the teen superheroes, right? Champions, all this stuff is referenced. Here's where it starts to get really good. I looked at a lot of these things. Anyway, all of those things should have been referenced. Every single one of these things should have been referenced. Oh, that's the other thing. Matt Murdock's brother, Mike Murdock, right? How about mention that he came back, And then if we go back and read those, it should have the mention in there, hey, the last time we saw Mike Murdock was actually boom, 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 way back in the freaking, I think that was the Gene Colan days, But the idea is make the references to get people to read those. Also, worst case scenario, people won't be lost when they're reading your stuff, or they'll know how to go back and find the information so that they don't feel lost when reading your stuff. Because I'm looking at this thing here. There's a really cool little description, like barely a 3-point thing in here. But for the love of God, it just doesn't give enough info. And it can't give you enough info because so many things have been happening in the Daredevil comics that you would need an entire page worth of stuff to catch people up. Now, here's the point of contention that some people might make to me. And these are people who are very child-minded and very short-sighted, all right? I don't care if you feel offended by this. If you're one of these people, grow up. There are people who will say to me, well, it's on you to read those comic books. I want to read those comics. First off, I have read most of these comic books that they're referencing. I understood everything that was in here, but I'm looking at this from the point of view of someone who hasn't read or may not have read everything in here, right? You can't expect the reader to have read everything. You can't. There are too many comic books coming out. And if you happen to read all of these comic books, either you are the greatest multitasker in the world or you are unemployed. I mean, I really, and maybe someplace in between, but at the end of the day, you are somehow able to make a lot more time than a lot of other people. Other people might just not be interested in reading all these damn comic books. So even if they've got all the time in the world, if they're similarly unemployed, they just don't have time to read all these comic books. It is the absolute worst mistake, and you would be the worst ever executive director to say to people, no, it's on you to read every single one of the comic books and to know everything that's happening inside of this comic book. Wrong answer. And if you can't understand how wrong that thinking process is, I pray that you don't get put in charge of the drive-thru at the McDonald's that you work at. No, it is not you can never place it upon the reader to have read everything. It's always so I can't even respond to these people when they say something like, no, the stuff was in the comic books. It was on you to read all this stuff. That's why even if you were to say that while this was in a Daredevil comic book as opposed to a separate event, I'd be shocked at such a statement. Absolutely beside myself. And this is a mini event, meaning anybody might decide to jump on this and say, well, let me see what this is about. And they look in this, and this is the most confusing comic book with very little references in here. Who's Mike Murdock? I don't understand. They may have read that comic book way back in the day. You know what I'm saying? Wolfman and Wolfman, did he ever? Can't remember. Might have been Stan Lee with Colan. But the idea is you can't put it on the reader to do something like that, to read every single thing. Give references and at least help them to have read everything. Help them to begin reading everything and preferably to buy everything. This is only going to increase sales. When we're talking about the bottom line, that is what always wins. Safety first. No, the bottom line first. And you know it's true. Ask any corporation on the side, not with a microphone in front of their face. Promise you. Everything that happened in this comic book led to some kind of a consequence or the promise of a consequence. Look, like I said, this Civil War mentality, this X-Men, oh my God, the heroes have to be reined in, and we're gonna get villains to come in and rein in the heroes. Look, at one point Shocker got punched in the face by Luke Cage, which I don't see that as a consequence. All right. I don't see that as a special consequence, I should say. By the way, the whole lead up to that and everything, Zdarsky is so good at his writing that I read Shocker's voice in almost an electronic, hollowed, like iron hollowed voice, right? Like he had his vibratory powers just controlling his whole body because the way it was drawn, so much of that has to go to Czecho. You know what I'm saying? But Zdarsky, the way that he wrote this stuff, it was just so. This was just amazing. Like I'm reading characters and voices that I never imagined them in these voices before, right? If you've ever read Bendis's run on Ultimate Spider-Man, the original Ultimate character, you know Shocker was not somebody, him in the Ringer, right? There's somebody like you don't give any special voice to these guys, except maybe a squeaky little whiny voice, you know? In this particular case, Shocker came off as a real badass and as a real jerk, which is perfect because it's clear, it's evident that's exactly what Zdarsky was going for. I love it when a book can get me so into it with the character design, right? So that's the images, that's the aesthetic there, and with the writing, and get that synchronous energy in pulling me into the book, right? So much of me was trying to take myself out of it because, again, the complaints that I already made. So much of it was and I was trying to keep myself out of the book. I didn't want to get too drawn into the book in case it wasn't going to be something, absolutely fantastic that I was going to love from beginning to end. But the book just kept on sucking me in, right? Like little scorpion is in there, baby freaking Funyun looking scorpion, with a little toothpick and a string on the back. I'm like, get over here. I'm like, all right, I'm coming. All right. Like this is really good. The characterization brought me into it. At one point, like little complaints that I wanted to make inside my head. Captain America was just inside of this book, and he was partially inspirational. Luke Cage later on, he starts making a speech. I'm like, Luke Cage is making a speech? I was like, he's not Sam Wilson, right, who's known for making great speeches, and he's not Captain America, who's known for being able to rally everybody together. If you're going to have a speech, have it be one of those two people. Instead, he goes and he says, I'm not Captain America, and I forget, he said somebody else, I don't remember who it was. But if somebody was like, oh, okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. He says, I'm not these people. And his speech was very short, very concise, very to the point. It wasn't going to inspire anybody, but it was basically saying, this is what I'm doing. Maybe question yourselves, what are you doing? All right. I'm trying to save you. What are you going to do about it? So I thought that was fantastic. So even when I thought to myself, this isn't going to work for me, the old Hulk Hogan, this just doesn't work for me, brother. I read this as like, no, actually it works really well. It works. It's fluidic. It glides. You know what I'm saying? More parts in this comic book. Like I said, Shocker being punched in the face is not a special consequence. It's just not. You expect the villain to be punched in the face. But there were consequences. There were actions so deep by both hero and villain in this comic book that consequences were mandated, right? Kingpin goes up to Daredevil and says, all of my research on trying to find your identity is completely whitewashed away, and I can't even remember this stuff. You're responsible for this, aren't you? And Daredevil just kind of sits there and goes, psh, F you, man. Like, totes a little bit back on the reefer and swings out of there, right? Yeah, man. He's like the freaking Daredevil bro. Anyway, real talk. He's like, whatever, screw you. And he just, he leaves. There were real consequences to that. And Daredevil already regrets acting like that in front of Mayor Fisk. That was fantastic. That happened in the beginning of the comic book, before it even said, who's responsible for making the comic book, right? That was the opening thing for the comic book. And I thought, this is perfect. By the end of the comic book, the beginning of the comic book, there's already some regret. It's a hero not quite acting like a hero. Oh, Kingpin deserves that and worse. But do heroes act like that? And Daredevil points out very pointedly, no, we don't. And maybe I'm the reason for all of this stuff. I could have just talked to him and said, Fisk, I seriously have no idea how this stuff happened. I don't know what, like, maybe you've got somebody inside. I honestly don't know what to tell you, but I don't have the ability to erase people's minds. That's just not what I do. I punch people, and occasionally I kick and I thwat at them with my billy club. You've known me too well. You know I can't go inside of people's minds. You know what I'm saying? Do you maybe have somebody close to you, your new wife, Typhoid Mary, who, has the ability to do stuff like that, right? It's a simple, like this is the Bilbo and Frodo, the Bilbo Baggins and Smaug the Dragon, thing. Hey, you came here to steal my treasure, but what about the 13 dwarves that you're with? Did they tell you, you're going to get a 14th share? Well, what happens with that 14th share? Is there some kind of a tax or a fee to get you back home? Are they providing security, or is that going to cost you extra? How many resources are they actually going to tap in order for you to keep what, your so-called share is really going to be? You can't trust your dwarf, right? It could have sounded anything like that. It could have been so simple to just boom, do that. Instead, this was literally just him not thinking about it and just saying, you know what? I guess punching Kingpin in the face and foiling his plans and screwing him over multiple times as he's trying to be a bad guy. I guess that's not enough for me. Let me also kind of, put the thumbtack in his forehead a little bit, And he almost immediately regretted it because of the reign of terror that Kingpin has wrought down upon them. One thing that I did have a problem with, and Zdarsky's a pretty small guy. You know what I'm saying? He's a little guy. He's not a big guy. He doesn't look like a fighter at all to me. I think that if somebody were to bow up on him, he'd probably, shrink in more ways than one. There'd be shrinkage involved there also. That's not to insult the guy. You know what I'm saying? He's gotten along just fine not being a fighter. Me, I've grown up being a fighter. You know what I'm saying? Telling a fighter not to think like a fighter is like telling an alligator to not bite people. Duh! Tell an artist not to draw, right? There's zero difference there. So I look at things, I look at fights or potential fights from a fighter's perspective. When I see Kingpin, this ridiculously huge dude, walking up to a slight Daredevil, a Daredevil who, I was just talking to my wife about this today, how I said, Vincent D'Onofrio as the Kingpin in the Charlie Cox Daredevil Netflix series. Vincent D'Onofrio, he played a really good role as a version of the Kingpin, but he's not the real Wilson Fisk Kingpin from the comic books. That one is way more believable, way more, well, not even believable, way more fantastically believable, right? This is a more realistic version. That version is like, what, he's got like 4% body fat at worst. You know what I'm saying? Daredevil broke his fist punching him once, twisted his ankle kicking him once, right? Daredevil doesn't even need to lock his vault doors. Nobody else is strong enough to lift them, you know what I'm saying, or to open them. So, and Daredevil practically took his back out trying to open it just that much, right? A quarter of an inch, barely enough to slip in, So yeah, like stuff like that. I'm always going to prefer the comic book almost every single time to anything else that's out there. But that's the thing about the comic book version of Kingpin. You don't let him get close to you, because if you do, that is the end of you. He is hair trigger. He moves faster than greased lightning. If he wants to snatch you, he will snatch you straight out in the air as you're leaping. Spider-Man isn't fast enough, sometimes to move out of Kingpin's, lurching grasp. Daredevil sure as hell can't. That's always been the big thing about Daredevil. He's like a poor man's Spider-Man. You know what I'm saying? His radar sense is better than Spider-Man's spider sense, but he has to pay attention to it. The spider sense works regardless, And obviously there are consequent people are going to get into an argument with me over the spider sense, blah, blah, blah. I said what I said, and this is coming directly from Stan Lee. So argue with Stan Lee. Be my guest. My point is, He's always been the poor man's Daredevil. Dr. Octopus has a hard time with Spider-Man. Kingpin has a hard time with Spider-Man. All these villains have a hard time with Spider-Man. They come over and suddenly things are a whole lot better with Daredevil. And Daredevil can't just muscle his way out of it or start webbing people up. He's got to outthink these guys. And he doesn't always win. He does not always win, right? That's one of the things that's just so great about the Daredevil character. All the things that you can't do with Spider-Man, you can do with Daredevil. In this particular case, Spider-Man can stand up to Kingpin, crowding over top of him, coming nose to nose with him, where he could just bear hug him and snap him into a piece, into multiple pieces. Daredevil can't do that. Daredevil can't afford that. And Daredevil should have been the person who, in my mind, as soon as I saw this, I thought to myself, Daredevil should have at the very least moved back, if not brought his fists at least partially up. Something like, I can't let you get close to me, Fisk. I can't let you get close to me. I know you're mad, and I don't want to fight you. Like, put your hands up. And I don't want to fight you. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to fight you in the streets. I don't want to fight you in private, right? I'd rather fight you in a legal way, all right? But I can't let you get close to me because I know how dangerous you are. And whether he says that with his mouth or with his mind, he should be saying that. I can't see Daredevil being dumb enough, and I know. His radar can't. You can see the stuff. I just said Kingpin is fast enough. He can snatch your ass right out the freaking air as you're leaping. And Daredevil can't afford it. Daredevil has to hit Kingpin multiple times. Kingpin only has to hit Daredevil once. One mistake. It only takes one mistake. You can cross the street 100 times without looking both ways. You only have to be wrong once. Right? And that's the thing. And that's a perfect example of Kingpin versus Daredevil. Daredevil only has to make one mistake, and that's your ass. You know what I'm saying? Against Kingpin, forget about it. But even then, that's a relatively minor complaint, which, again, exterior circumstances related circumstances wound up making it so that stuff didn't necessarily matter, right? It was an all too cocky thing for him to just keep standing there, thinking to himself, you're doing this in the public street. Ha ha, you're not going to attack me. If he's wrong, he's dead wrong. He only had to be wrong once, but he said it at the end. I was too cocky. That was stupid of me. Yes, it was on multiple levels. And since he said it, it's like taking the piss out of something, You're bowing up and I just kind of stick a pin in you. You're just like, yeah, not so big now, are you? Right? It worked so well. I don't want to spoil the book because there were so many good things that happened in this comic book. But I'm going to say this. There's a moment with the Fantastic Four. I've said so many times before that just for my first face-to-face meeting with Chip, that Chip should be writing the Fantastic Four book. I don't care about hurting Dan Slott's feelings. Get over it, son. Get over it. All right? Dan Slott is somebody, he would recover just like that. And he'd start writing something else and it would be amazing and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, you want the best person on each book. Nobody's going to write a Fantastic Four book the way that Zdarsky is going to write a freaking Fantastic Four book. Nobody. I don't care who you are. On top of that, besides the fact that the Fantastic Four were in here very quickly, because that's just who Chip is, aside from the fact that they were in here so briefly, the little bit that the Thing, Ben Grimm, was in here, I've got to give it up to Czecho and Zdarsky, because both of them did so, like the image, what happened to the Thing and how he responds, and the images that did not need writing. They just needed the look, the perfect compromise of, this is a comic book. So sometimes I have to get oral, right? Not oral, aural. And sometimes it has to be visual. And this was the perfect balance in between the two. And it's just this there's like 3 or 4 panels in here and only one thing said by the Thing that make me once again start saying that we need to start raising those flags that Zdarsky needs to be writing the Fantastic Four. My God. Wow. Absolutely. And he just does it so effortlessly. It's almost embarrassing. Anyway, guys, that's going to be it for me. I think that was more than enough. Guys, get this book. Don't be silly. Don't be silly. Get the freaking book. You're going to love it. There will be zero regrets with it. Like the video. Watch an ad. Because even your favorite YouTubers like to make money once in a while. And I will talk to you later. Professor Bill, Comic Book University. Class dismissed.